He thought he'd broken me. He believed I'd just roll over. Let him waltz into his new life with his new girlfriend, driving my car, spending my money, and laughing at my expense. But what he didn't realize was that he had awakened a part of me I had buried too long, the part that was tired of being his doormat, tired of playing the quiet, accommodating wife who cleaned up after his chaos. When I finally got my revenge, it hit him harder than he ever could have imagined. And if you've ever tasted the sweet sting of karma, you'll understand why I didn't just get even, I got free. I was 37 when this saga truly unfolded, but its roots stretched back years. My ex-husband wasn't just a bad partner. He was a warning sign dressed in charming smiles and empty promises. Narcissistic, manipulative, and financially reckless, he thrived on control and chaos. My sister once told me she worried she'd see my name splashed across a Dateline episode or worse in a true crime podcast as a victim. At the time, I laughed off her dark humor, but deep down, I knew she wasn't entirely wrong. There were nights I lay awake, wondering if this man, the one I had once loved, might end up destroying me, body and soul. From the moment we married, his problems became mine. His old car was barely holding together, and his credit destroyed. Thanks to $50,000 in debt he'd managed to rack up before we even met. Meanwhile, I had spotless credit, carefully built over years of discipline and sacrifice. So naturally, he turned to me, spinning his usual lines of desperation mixed with false tenderness. "You're my partner," he'd whisper. "We're in this together." Before long, I found myself co-signing on a car lease I didn't want, with payments drafted straight from my bank account. It was the first of many times I would quietly shoulder the burden of his recklessness, convincing myself it was temporary, that it would get better. Spoiler, it never did. Over the years, I poured over $10,000 into his messes. $10,000 of my blood, sweat, and tears, handed to him while he partied through life without consequence. That money could have been vacations, savings, investments in myself. Instead, it vanished into the black hole of his irresponsibility. And every time I thought we'd hit rock bottom, he somehow found a new way to dig deeper. Then came the accident. I was driving home one evening when another car barreled through a red light and T-boned me. My car was totaled, my body bruised, my nerves shattered. The only relief was that insurance would cover the damages, giving me the means to buy another vehicle. But even in that moment of pain, he found a way to make it about him. While I was still aching from the crash, he suggested, no, insisted, that I use the payout to buy him a BMW, a manual transmission, of course, knowing full well I couldn't even drive stick. That moment was the crack in the dam. For the first time in our marriage, I told him no. The word came out shaky, but it was there, solid and undeniable. I told him if he wanted that BMW, he could trade in his lease and buy it himself. Predictably, he exploded. He called me selfish, accused me of not supporting us, then sulked for days, pouting like a child denied candy. But something inside me shifted. I realized I didn't have to live like this anymore. With my insurance payout, I bought a modest, practical car. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. And paying just $400 out of pocket after the claim felt like a victory. Quietly, I began packing my things. Bit by bit, I loaded my clothes, books, and keepsakes into the trunk like a squirrel preparing for winter. And when I was ready, I told him the words that sealed our fate. I want a divorce. The decision wasn't a tantrum or a whim. It was cold, calculated, and deliberate. I made spreadsheets, documenting every penny he owed me, car payments, rent, utilities. I even offered him a grace period, agreeing to cover half the rent for 60 days so he could get on his feet. But I made one thing clear. The car lease had to be his responsibility now. My name needed to come off, and he needed to find someone else to co-sign. I was done being chained to his failures. But narcissists don't respect agreements. To them, contracts, promises, and decency are just obstacles to sidestep. I should have known he'd find a way to wriggle out of it. Still, I wasn't prepared for how quickly he flaunted his betrayal. Barely a week after we split, my social media feeds exploded. With his new soulmate, he plastered photos of them together, gushing about their forever love like we hadn't just ended a marriage. Worse, they post inside my home, the house I had just left, the one I had paid for. And then came the photo that pushed me over the edge. Her, smiling smugly behind the wheel of his car. The car still legally tied to me. The car draining my bank account every month. That was the moment something in me snapped. I had tried to be kind, to be patient, to give him time to transition. But watching another woman enjoy the fruits of my labor while he paraded his new life, that was my villain origin story. At first, I started small. I noticed he was still using my Netflix account. So one night, while he was probably mid-binge, I changed the password. Petty? Maybe. Satisfying? Absolutely. A few days later, I canceled the internet service, still in my name, leaving him without Wi-Fi. If he wanted to start fresh, he could start by paying for his own streaming and internet. But those moves were appetizers. The main course was still coming. I sent him a blunt text. You have 24 hours to get my name off that lease. Maybe your new girlfriend can co-sign since she loves driving that car so much. His reply came like clockwork, angry, defensive, dripping with gaslighting. He accused me of being unreasonable, told me these things take time, and tried to twist it into my problem. But I wasn't the same woman who once crumbled under his words. I was done playing the fool. The next morning, I called the leasing company myself. My hands were shaking, but my voice was firm. I explained the situation, our divorce, the lease still tied to me, the payments bleeding from my account while he lived his new life. The woman on the line listened, then said words that changed everything. Don't worry, darling. I got you. Those words felt like a lifeline. She confirmed what I already suspected. He hadn't even attempted to transfer the lease. He'd been stringing me along, letting me foot the bill while he played house. But within 20 minutes, she had filed the paperwork to remove my name. He would be notified by email the next business day, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. I couldn't resist one last jab. I texted him, if you're going to lie, at least pick one I can't verify. Check your email. For the first time in years, I felt light, free, and powerful. He had no idea the storm that was about to hit him, but I did, and it was only the beginning. The fallout from that email was predictable, almost laughably so. Within hours, my phone lit up with a barrage of messages from him, each one nastier than the last. He accused me of betrayal, called me petty, swore that I was trying to ruin his life. The irony wasn't lost on me. This was a man who had drained my finances, trashed my credit, paraded another woman in my home, and now he had the audacity to act like I was the villain. His words used to cut me, but not anymore. This time, they bounced off me like dull arrows hitting steel. The real twist came a week later, when I learned who had stepped in to co-sign that lease. Not a friend, not his new girlfriend, but his father. A man whose life revolved around numbers, whose credit score was his crown jewel. He despised debt, saw it as a stain on his otherwise spotless reputation. For years, he had bragged about never missing a payment, about his near-perfect financial record. And now, thanks to his reckless son, he was tied to a car that symbolized everything he hated. I didn't plan for that irony, but oh, how delicious it was. I tucked the information away, unsure of how it might serve me later. For now, I was content knowing that for once, his chaos wasn't mine to clean up. Let his father shoulder the burden. Let him see firsthand the destruction his son left in his wake. Meanwhile, I was rediscovering myself. Moving into a small, sunlit apartment felt like exhaling after years of holding my breath. Therapy became my lifeline, helping me untangle the knots of gaslighting and emotional abuse that had defined my marriage. My days weren't filled with his demands anymore. I no longer had to wonder what mood he'd be in when he walked through the door, or if he'd explode over something trivial. For the first time in years, I felt safe. Still, even in his absence, he had a way of creeping back into my life. At first, it was small things, mutual friends mentioning him, posts popping up on social media. I muted, unfollowed, blocked. But then in 2020, the past came roaring back in the most unexpected way. The world had shut down. Lockdowns turned daily life into a strange blur of Zoom calls and grocery deliveries. And right in the middle of all that, my phone started ringing. Every 2 weeks, like clockwork, the leasing company called. Always the same question: can we speak? Each time, I repeated the same line: we're divorced. I'm not on that lease anymore. My name was removed years ago. The reps were polite, apologetic even, but the calls kept coming. 4 months of interruptions. 4 months of feeling that old knot of dread in my stomach whenever I saw their number on my screen. It was like being dragged back into his orbit against my will. The universe, I realized, has a way of balancing the scales. Sometimes it takes longer than we want. Sometimes it's messy, but eventually, the truth finds its way to the surface. And when it does, it's unstoppable. That night, I poured another glass of wine, curled up on my couch, and let myself savor it. The quiet justice of knowing he was finally facing consequences he couldn't spin, couldn't gaslight away, couldn't dump onto my shoulders. For once, his chaos was his alone, and that was only the beginning. The silence after that call was almost eerie. For months, I'd been bracing myself for the next interruption, the next reminder that his irresponsibility could still creep into my life. But once the leasing company had his father's details, the phone calls to me stopped cold. At first, I wasn't sure if that was good or bad. Silence can be dangerous. It can mean a storm is gathering. But then, a week later, a mutual acquaintance dropped a juicy tidbit that confirmed exactly what I'd suspected. Apparently, his father had gone nuclear. The car payments weren't just late, they were seriously delinquent. And because his name was on the paperwork, the financial blowback landed squarely on him. To make matters worse, the car itself had been repossessed. Picture it, some tow truck in the middle of the night, hauling away the very vehicle he used to flaunt his new life. His father had been humiliated, his precious credit scarred, and all because of the son he'd enabled for far too long. The fallout in their household was volcanic. His father cut him off, financially, emotionally, maybe even permanently. That golden boy shine my ex used to polish so carefully was gone, replaced with the undeniable stain of failure. When I first heard the story, I almost laughed out loud. Not because repossession is funny, but because it was poetic. The car had been his symbol of freedom, his flashy ticket out of our marriage, his proof that he could do better without me. And now it had been dragged away, leaving him exposed for what he truly was: reckless, selfish, and broke. I didn't post about it, didn't gloat, didn't even hint at what I knew. I kept it close, like a secret treasure. Some things are sweeter when they're savored in private. Still, I couldn't help but reflect on how far I'd come. 2 years earlier, I would have been devastated by this kind of drama. I would have been panicking about how it affected me, how I'd clean up the mess, how to make it all work. But this time, I wasn't in the blast radius. I was watching from a distance, completely untouchable. And oh, how liberating that was. Therapy helped me see just how deeply he had conditioned me to believe his chaos was my responsibility. Every time he failed, he made it my problem. Every time he lied, he made me carry the guilt. But the truth, his downfall was inevitable. The car, the debts, the repossession, those weren't accidents. They were the natural consequences of the way he lived his life. What made it satisfying wasn't the repossession itself. It was the fact that he finally had to face it without me. He had no buffer, no scapegoat, no wife to stand in front of him and absorb the blast. As the months turned into years, I rarely heard about him anymore. Friends stopped bringing him up. His social media presence dwindled. His name stopped popping into conversations. It was like he'd faded into the background, a footnote in my story instead of the main character he always thought he was. And me? I was free. Free in a way I'd never imagined. Free to rebuild, to redefine, to laugh again without fear of being mocked. Free to trust my own instincts, to believe in my own worth, to stand tall in the knowledge that I had walked through hell and come out whole. That's the thing about survival. It's not loud or flashy. It's quiet, steady, stubborn. It's waking up every day and choosing peace over chaos, healing over bitterness, growth over resentment. But every so often, late at night when the world is still, I think back to that car, that shiny, gleaming symbol of his arrogance being hauled away on a flatbed, his father's furious voice ringing in his ears, his girlfriend slipping out the door. And I can't help but smile, because that was the moment the tables turned, the moment karma finally caught up, the moment I realized revenge doesn't always need fire and fury. Sometimes it just needs patience. And I had plenty of that. There's a strange peace that comes when you realize the storm has passed and you're still standing. After years of surviving his chaos, I woke up one morning and felt light. No dread, no pit in my stomach, no gnawing worry about what fire I'd need to put out next. Just calm. But peace has a way of making you reflective. And the more distance I had from him, the more I started to see patterns I hadn't recognized before. His arrogance, his recklessness, they weren't random quirks. They were habits, ingrained so deeply he couldn't escape them even if he tried. And the car fiasco? That was just the first domino. Not long after the repossession, I heard whispers about him bouncing checks, then about unpaid rent, then about jobs that didn't last longer than a few months. The man who once strutted around claiming he was destined for greatness couldn't even keep the basics together. And every time his life unraveled, he blamed someone else. That was his favorite trick, blame. When we were married, I was the shield that absorbed it all. But now, without me, his targets were limited. His father had cut him off. His girlfriend had walked away. His friends were tired of the constant drama. Slowly, one by one, people distanced themselves from him. I remember the day I saw him in person again. It was by accident at the grocery store of all places. He didn't notice me at first. I was in the next aisle over when I heard his voice. It wasn't the booming, cocky tone I remembered. It was low, strained, almost defeated. Curiosity got the better of me. I peeked around the corner, and there he was, thinner, paler, clothes wrinkled like he'd slept in them. He was arguing with the cashier about a declined card, his frustration mounting as the line of customers behind him grew impatient. It should have been awkward, painful even, but instead, it was clarifying. This was who he really was, not the man who used to swagger through our home, Not the Instagram version of himself he tried to sell to the world. Just a hollow shell of entitlement and excuses. Finally exposed for everyone to see. I didn't approach him, didn't gloat, didn't even make eye contact. I simply turned and walked out of the store, my chest filled with something I can only describe as freedom. I didn't need to prove anything to him. The universe was already doing that for me. Of course, word of the encounter spread quickly. Small towns have a way of magnifying stories, and soon I was hearing all sorts of tales about his decline. Eviction notices, job losses, late night scenes at bars where he'd rant about how everyone betrayed him. Each story was another brick in the wall of consequences closing in around him. And here's the thing, none of it surprised me. Because when someone builds their life on lies and manipulation, the foundation eventually crumbles. It was never a matter of if. It was always when. Still, there was one last piece of karma that hadn't fallen into place yet. His father. See, the repossession had been bad enough, but credit damage doesn't just vanish. Every missed payment, every collection account, it sticks like a scar on paper. And for a man like his father, whose entire identity was built around financial perfection, that scar was unbearable. I didn't hear this directly, but a friend of a friend let it slip one night over drinks. Apparently, his father had gone scorched earth after the repossession. Not only had he cut his son off, but he'd also made sure the entire family knew exactly why. Holidays, family gatherings, my ex was persona non grata. He wasn't just a disappointment. He was an embarrassment. The irony was almost too rich. The man who once paraded around as if he were the center of the universe now couldn't even get an invitation to Thanksgiving. I could have left it there. Honestly, most people would have. But sometimes life hands you opportunities too perfect to ignore. One afternoon, months later, I got another letter in the mail from the leasing company. A clerical error, they said. Just a final notice mistakenly sent to my old address. I didn't need to act on it. My name was still clear. But stapled to the letter was a copy of the account's delinquency summary. I don't know if it was fate or just incompetence on their part, but there it was, black and white proof of his negligence. Late payments, repossession details, even notes about attempts to contact the co-signer, his father. I stared at the paper for a long time, debating. Then, with a small smile, I slipped it into an envelope and mailed it directly to his father. No note, no explanation, just the truth, neatly packaged. A few weeks later, I heard the fallout. Loud, messy, unforgettable. His father hadn't just been angry, he'd been livid.
What are you doing here?
Undeniable proof that his son had destroyed everything
I needed to see you.
From what I gathered, the confrontation had been explosive, ending with his father declaring he was done for good. And this time, he meant it. No second chances, no quiet enabling, just cold, hard exile. And me, I didn't feel guilty. Not even a little. Because I hadn't lied, hadn't exaggerated, hadn't lifted a finger beyond putting a stamp on an envelope. The truth had done all the work. There's a power in that, in realizing revenge doesn't always have to be loud or violent. Sometimes the quietest actions echo the loudest. By the end of that year, I barely recognized myself. Not because I was broken, but because I was finally whole. The scars of that marriage were still there, but they weren't wounds anymore. They were reminders of what I'd survived, what I'd reclaimed, what I'd built for myself. I had a new job, a new circle of friends, and most importantly, a new sense of self-worth. The version of me who once believed she couldn't survive without him was gone, replaced by someone who not only survived but thrived. And somewhere out there, my ex was still floundering, still blaming, still unraveling. But that was his journey, not mine. Because the best revenge isn't destruction, it's indifference. It's living so fully, so freely, that the person who tried to break you becomes irrelevant. Still, on nights when I sit on my balcony with a glass of wine and watch the world go quiet, I sometimes think back to that car, that ridiculous gleaming symbol of everything wrong with our marriage. And I smile, because that car, in the end, was his undoing. And my liberation, my life now is quiet, full of things he would have called boring. Coffee on the balcony in the morning, long walks with friends, saving money instead of burning through it, reading books late into the night. But boring, I've learned, is beautiful. Boring means peace. Boring means stability. Boring means I can breathe without waiting for the next explosion. Sometimes, in the quiet moments, I think about karma, how it doesn't always come fast, but it always comes fair. How it doesn't always roar, but it always whispers the truth. And how, in the end, the best revenge isn't about destroying someone else. It's about refusing to let them destroy you. That's my story, not of a perfect ending, not of some cinematic showdown, but of survival, of patience, of truth. And if you take anything from it, let it be this. You don't have to set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. You don't have to carry the weight of someone else's mistakes. You don't have to absorb the blame for someone else's failures. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is step back. Let the truth do its work and watch as karma delivers the justice you no longer need to chase. Because in the end, revenge isn't about them. It's about you, about walking away whole, about reclaiming your power, about living a life so good that their downfall becomes nothing more than background noise. And trust me, there is no sweeter sound.